The old Richmond County Jail on 4th Street was a pretty sturdy piece of work. Built during the 1930s, its walls were so thick that when they finally tore it down 60 years later, it took forever. But it wasn't escape-proof. We found that out a few days before Christmas 1968, when 2 grocery store bandits, a nursing student rapist, and a man scheduled for Georgia's death row held a knife to jailer Benny Robinson's throat and demanded his car keys. They got out here, where the old 4th Street jail used to sit, got into his car, and drove to South Carolina. The police manhunt was on for a foursome that was somewhat fearsome. James C. Lee was sentenced to die for the June 1968 killing of Robert White, a med student and son of a prominent Georgia family. Charles Solomon was charged with the rape of a nursing student, also in 1968. And Grover Emerson and David Wayne Babb, they were linked to a grocery holdup back when most people bought food with cash and not debit cards. Oddly enough, there was almost a 5th member, Robert Leon Merriweather, the most famous escape artist of the time in Georgia. He had already gotten out of jails and custody in Atlanta, Macon, Columbus, Thompson, and even Augusta. When they asked him if he wanted to go, he told them, "Nah, not really." In all, it was a pretty good escape plan until they actually escaped, and then it fell apart. They got over into Aiken County around Jackson, but didn't know where to go. They kept asking Robinson, their hostage, who kept telling them he was unfamiliar with Jackson and all its small roads and big fields and general lack of highway signage. Finally, somewhere on today's Savannah River Plant property, they pulled the car off the road, ripped its ignition wire out, tied up Robinson, blindfolded him, then they split up and ran. Robinson had quietly worked his knots loose. He waited until they were far enough away, and then he got out of the car, he took off his mask, and he ran for help. Pretty soon, Solomon and Lee were captured, and the hunt was on for Emerson and Babb. Richmond County Sheriff E.R. Adkins and Aiken County Sheriff Paul Grant, toting guns, were walking along the railroad tracks because they suspected the men on foot might hop a freight. They didn't. 2 of them were caught quickly, and it's no wonder. Sheriff Grant and others had bloodhounds, men on horses, extra deputies, and just about anybody with a gun out looking for bad guys. They even had a helicopter, and eventually Babb and Emerson were found hiding in an Aiken County barn. Soon everybody was home or back in jail for Christmas. But then that's where it gets interesting. Babb was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but he wasn't in that long. He got out, got a job, and found the Lord, becoming an active Sunday school teacher, the Chronicle archives say. Emerson, the ringleader, got 20 years, but he got out early too. According to Georgia prison records, Grover Emerson was sent to prison again in 1984 on a rape and kidnapping charge in Middle Georgia. This time he got life without parole, and he's still behind bars. Solomon, who got a life sentence on the 1968 rape charge, did get parole in 1978. And in 1980, he was arrested again, this time for an Augusta bank robbery. He was sentenced to 20 years. He was eventually paroled, and the feds say he moved to New Mexico. Perhaps the luckiest one was James C. Lee, the murderer Georgia had hoped to execute. Georgia Attorney General Arthur Bolton decided in 1972 that Lee and others then on Georgia's death row would have their death sentences converted to life sentences because the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled Georgia's death penalty unconstitutional. That luck that had eluded him after his 1968 Christmas jailbreak seems to have returned. That new life sentence for killing a med student, well, it turned out to be 14 years. According to the records of the Georgia Department of Corrections, Lee was paroled in 1986, and then he escaped again. Well, at least from public scrutiny. never hear of him. I wonder what he remembers of that Christmas.